Hey everyone, welcome to the Marriage, the Foundation of Society podcast. My name is Lindsay.
My name is Dwayne.
And this week we kind of want to talk about the 5 love languages. Last time we talked about acts of service being submissive. And while it is submissive in regards of our relationship with Christ, submission, our acts of service, our obedience, that's kind of the biggest thing that he wants. But in our marriage, our love language may be different than just acts of service. And the love language that we speak may be different from our spouse. So we wanted to go over the 5 love languages. If you haven't heard about it, it's a book by Gary Chapman that basically says we each have 5 languages that are our love languages that we speak. And those languages are words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. And in the book, he includes a quiz that you can kind of tally up to determine what your primary love language is, and your subsequent love languages after that kind of ranks them and what's important to you. And he talks about how it's important to understand each other's love language so that we can love each other in the way that the other person is hearing us. He also talks about our love tank in regards to our love languages. So he says that essentially we all have a love tank that needs to be filled, and our primary love language is how we get filled up. When we are full, we're more easily able to give love to other people. But when our love tank is empty, we tend to, you can't pour from an empty cup, essentially. And so that's where people start to get selfish, they get angry, they get, all kinds of issues. But when their love tank is full, then they can pour it out. Kind of the same concept of going to church and getting filled with Christ's love and what he says, what he teaches. You get filled up on his word, and then you can go out into the world, pour out that message of love and truth and everything that goes along with it. But when you aren't being fed in church or in any way, in any capacity, you're not being filled up with God's love and truth, then it's hard for us to go out into the world and spread it to other people.
So when you're fellowshipping, when you're being involved in your local congregations and stuff, just being around the fellowship of brothers and sisters, all of those things help build you up. Every gift that the believer has, every talent that he's been given by God, all of those things are meant to edify the church. And just so there's no misunderstanding, the church is not the building, it's the people who are believers. So when you're fellowshipping, everybody is experiencing everybody else's gifts and being around other believers. And so to speak, it fills up your tank. And at the end of the day, the church or the congregating, the Sunday services, those are meant to fill you up so that you can pour yourself out into the world. Sunday service fellowship, that's for the believer. It's strictly for the believers. Unbelievers can be there, but it's meant for the believers to be filled up.
So Gary Chapman, he relates the idea of, the love tank and getting filled up. He relates that down to relationships, specifically the marital relationship. But he has many, actually, reading here. He's got the 5 love languages for children, teenagers, singles, appreciation in the workplace. So he has a whole bunch of books that kind of relate back to these 5 love languages. But this one specifically is about the marital relationship. So when you're dating and you're putting on your best and you're doing everything to make the other person happy, that's where the relationship starts, right? That's where we fall in love and we're getting to know each other and we're building a relationship. And the kindness that we're showing each other, that's what leads to us ultimately wanting to get married and be together and decide to spend our lives together. And then you get married and you have the honeymoon phase, and then that honeymoon phase phases out. You start to get comfortable and, it's just everyday life. So you're not putting in the effort like you did when you were dating.
When they say that the honeymoon stage is over, what they're saying is that the novelty of it has worn off. The newness of the relationship has worn off. So that's when the extra work is put in, because it's easy, or it's easier to love on your wife when you have those high emotions and those googly, bubbly, cloud nine feelings and stuff like that. But when all that stuff fades, you're still required to honor and love your wife, and vice versa, even if those feelings aren't there.
Right. And those feelings can fade at different times for everybody, and they can come in and out throughout the entirety of your marriage. But when those feelings are out, you need to put in the work. And the way you put in the work is, according to Gary Chapman, one of the best ways to do that is to understand your spouse's love language. So when you understand their love language, then you're putting drops into their love tank. So if someone's love language is acts of service, then every time you do the dishes, or if it's the husband, every time he watches the baby so that the wife can go take a nap or take a shower or do anything for herself. Or if the husband's working and the wife is cooking dinner or does something that is normally on his plate and she takes over just to help him. Those are putting drops in that person's bucket for acts of service. And if that's their love language, they're going to feel that, they're going to see that, and they're going to feel loved by that. Now, if it's words of affirmation, that's their love language. If you are complimenting them, telling them how much you appreciate them, telling them they did a good job, whatever it is, then that, again, is putting drops in their bucket to fill up their love tank. And ideally, we want to do this all the time. We want to speak their love language. And again, when we talk about submission, submitting to each other, these love languages are submitting to the other person, because that may not be your love language, but you know that's what they see, that's what they hear, that's how they feel loved. So you are submitting yourself, doing what makes them happy. And that's all part of submission. So in the book, The 5 Love Languages, he starts off with a story of what happens before the wedding. And then at the end of each chapter, he has a your turn option. So I wanted to read these for you guys so that you can think about these questions. If you're listening to this with your spouse, you can think about these questions together and talk about them. So in the beginning, he tells a story of meeting someone on a plane, and the guy they're talking about, and he asks him what he does. And the author tells him, oh, well, I'm a marriage counselor or whatever it is that he goes by. But the guy asks him, what happens after the wedding? Everything was so great with my first marriage, and then everything went downhill after the wedding. And then same with the second wife, and I don't know, it's 2 or 3 wives in here that he had the same experience with. And that's where he lays the foundation for understanding each other's love languages. And then at the end, he has it where it says, your turn. And he says, complete the following. There would be fewer divorces if only people blank. And then that's left for you to discuss with your spouse. So kind of want to do that for you too. You guys can talk about each of these questions. So think about that, talk about it, pause it, talk about it after, whatever you want to do. But start these conversations and learn about each other. I love when I get a good set of questions that Dwayne and I can talk about, because that's helping us get to know each other, helping build the fire. It's helping us grow closer when we're communicating like that. So he goes then to keeping the love tank full, and he talks about everything, we just talked about. And then at the end, he says, has there ever been a time when you did something that you meant well out of loving motives, and how did that turn out? How many times have people done something meaning well, and then it didn't turn out so well? And that's where the love language comes from. We're not speaking the love language of the other person. So it could have been good intentioned, but the other person didn't necessarily feel that. Although I think for the person that didn't feel that, they should still try to recognize
the heart behind it.
Right. Recognize the effort.
Most of the times that I've done things with the right intention out of love for people, I wouldn't say it ever goes wrong. I would never say it backfires. At the least, they probably just didn't recognize it, probably didn't see it.
Yeah, it was kind of an afterthought for them.
Yeah, but for the most part, it goes well. I mean, for the most part, people recognize the blessing, even if it's not necessarily their love language. You know, we have all 5 of these love languages, and although everybody has something in particular that they value over others, like some may value quality time over words of affirmation, etc., at the same time, everybody can still be blessed by all of those things, even if it's not the one
Primary.
even if it's not their primary.
We all have a little bit of everything. All of these love languages, we all need some of all of it. So again, where the ranking, where he does the little quiz and you have the ranking, it's going to tell you you're going to have some in each love language. There's going to be some part of you that needs that, because we actually do need all of them. It just, your primary love language may not be acts of service. Your primary love language may be physical touch, but you're still going to need acts of service as a way to feel loved. And I think that when you feel starved in a particular area, that probably grows higher for you. If physical touch is not your primary love language, say that's your least favorite love language, but you're not getting any touch at all, then your desire for that physical touch may grow. And for a season, at least, that may become your primary love language because you're starved for that. So we all need all of the love languages. It's to some degree. It's just which one is generally the one that you need the most.
Or which one do you value the most? I'll give you an example for myself. Words of affirmation is not necessarily my cup of tea. I don't feel like I need words of affirmation. But I think at the same time, it would affect me negatively to some degree if over the course of time I've never received any words of affirmation.
And over time, I think your love language can change. Again, I think that it's probably heavily dependent on if you're, essentially starved in that area. Like I said, for me, I don't need gifts necessarily. Not really big on needing gifts. But if I never got some kind of gift, that doesn't even have to be a material, big, rich thing. It could just be thinking enough of me to pick up M&Ms at the gas station or something. Something small. If I never got that from Dwayne, to where he never gave me anything or thought enough of me to want to do something like that, then I may become kind of starved for it and crave that more, because people look at gifts as being a materialistic thing, but it's not about that. It's more of the heart, like, oh, you thought enough of me to get me something, right. Something that you knew that I would like. So I think that, again, your love language can change, and that it is pretty dependent on what you're receiving to keep your love tankful.
In like manner, I think the point behind all of the love languages is that you put thought into whatever it is that you're doing for the other person, and showing that you value that person enough that you're thinking about them and trying to do something that blesses and honors them in some way, whether it's their love language or not, but especially if it's their love language. The issue, like gifts, she said, like me getting M&Ms for her, even though it was small, is the fact that I was thinking about her enough to do something, even if it was small like that. You could apply that to every single love language. The fact that you were thinking about the person enough to extend yourself towards them like that.
So in the book, he then goes to falling in love, and he talks about what I was saying earlier about first start dating and you're doing all the right things, trying to woo each other and build your relationship. You typically touch on all of those love languages naturally, just because you are putting your best foot forward and trying to get each other to fall in love. So with that, I always tell people that are struggling in their marriage, think back on those times. What made you fall in love? Think back to those days. If I'm talking to someone, think back to when you first got together, your very first time you saw them, your very first date, when they held your hand, the first time you kissed, first time you said, I love you. Think back to those moments, because those moments are what got you guys to where you are now. And even though some people may be struggling, there may be a lot of built up resentments and hurts, there's still value in going back to those times of dating and thinking and remembering and trying to get back to that place. In the your turn part, he asks, look back on that point in your marriage when reality set in and the initial romantic feelings faded. How did this affect your relationship, for better or worse? Thinking about that for me, trying to think of when those feelings faded, there was never a just clear one day it was there, the next day it was gone. But whenever that happened, I think for me, it just kind of goes into a deeper love. We may not be having the butterflies and the excitement and everything, but I still get excited when I'm going to be having him home, when he's coming home at the end of the day, or when we get to spend some time together. I still get excited for that. But those day-to-day butterfly feelings may not be there like they were, but that love and the depth of that love, I know that I can depend on him no matter what. He's my person. Everybody says my person. I think that's like Grey's Anatomy or something. I never watched it, but they say my person, and he's my person. I can depend on him. I know generally what to expect with him. I know that I'll never have to worry about being left behind with him. So those butterflies may not be there, but the love, the action of love and the choosing to love is deep.
Yeah, in Matthew, Jesus is talking about the parable of the sower and the seed. And in part of the parable, he talks about how some of the seed was thrown onto, or it fell into rocky ground where there was little soil. And the seed sprouted soon, but when the sun came up, it burnt the young plants. And even though this isn't related to marriage, it could be applied in a manner like this. We were talking about those initial cloud nine feelings and just being giddy about being around your partner, just that the novelty of it. And then once that wears off, there's no real commitment. You were so reliant upon the excitement of it and novelty of it that once that wore out, commitment just wasn't there. And see, that's where, if that ever does happen, we're not saying that everybody's going to go through this. Everybody's going to go through the novelty wearing off, but then that's where the true commitment comes in, because it's easy to do that when you have the high emotions and stuff.
So when we're talking about the 5 love languages, he goes, from what we were just talking about, he goes into words of affirmation. And words of affirmation can be encouraging words, they can be kind words, they can be humble words. And when it's humble words, it's love makes requests, not demands. So when we talk about the submission thing again, and, husbands love your wives, love makes requests, not demands. So when you're loving your wife well, you're not, like Dwayne says, lording it over her. You're loving her. And in that, it makes a wife want to submit. If Dwayne came in and he said that, I want you to make me steak with mashed potatoes, and you better get it on it right now and do it exactly how I like it, that's not going to make me happy to do it. I may do it, but it's not going to be, I'm not coming from a place of love at that point.
And over the course of time, that's going to get old.
It's going to build resentment.
Yeah.
But when he comes into me, comes over to me and says, hey, you know what? Steak sounds really good. Can you make that one of these nights? Of course I'm going to want to make it, because he came to me lovingly and he asked. With these words of affirmation, then he requested, and then he can say, hey, that was really good. Thank you so much for doing that. Or, hey, you look beautiful tonight. Hey, one hot mama. Just whatever.
Hey, hot mama.
Whatever you feel, say it. Say it, because if words of affirmation especially is your partner's love language, they need to hear it. So say it. Don't hold back on saying it. So when he comes to the your turn part, he says, share instances with your spouse when words had a profound impact on your life, positively or negatively. So when you're talking with your spouse, think back to a time when words really meant something to you and it really affected you. And then just share your heart with each other. So he says, if your spouse's love language is words of affirmation, remind yourself, words are important, words are important, words are important. And then put that into practice. 1 week, keep a written record of all the words of affirmation you give your spouse each day. On Monday, I said, great job on this meal. You look nice in that outfit. I appreciate your picking up the dry cleaning. On Tuesday, I said, etc. And then just keep track. And eventually, if that's not something that you're typically used to doing, eventually you're going to get in the habit of doing it if you put in that effort for your spouse. The next love language, quality time. Now, these aren't necessarily in order. This is just the order that he put them in. So quality time, he talks about spending time together. I think quality time is probably a big one for me. I want that time of just him and I want that time to talk. I want that time to be together, whether that's watching a movie together, going out to dinner, having our deep conversations that we have. We always have good conversations, I feel like. And even though right now quality time can be hard to find, it's hard to squeeze in, when we do have those good, deep conversations, that does help me feel loved. My tank feels full. But, going to the beach and walking on the beach, or whatever it is that we can do together, and where it's focused, not just sitting in the room, both on our phones, not talking or acknowledging each other. I think he probably thinks that's quality time. But for me, that's not necessarily quality time. That's just kind of us being around each other, but not even engaged or talking to each other or having anything to do with each other.
So part of the idea behind the love languages is doing it even if it's not your cup of tea. She's mentioning quality time, and her and I don't have a whole bunch in common when it comes to
doing things.
Yeah, doing things like
hobbies and stuff.
Yes. And even like with the movies and stuff like that. So I have to be intentional in trying to love her by giving her the quality time that she wants. Even if it means watching the movies that I normally wouldn't watch. Even if it means going to the places that otherwise I wouldn't go to. I go to because of her. And when you do that, you don't do it begrudgingly and disengage yourself, because that defeats the purpose of it. So she likes to go on nature reserves and stuff like that. And me, I'm more of a homebody, but because I am loving her, I go out to those places with her, and I'm still engaged, even though it's not something that I would normally do on my own. So when you are doing those different love languages, and you're doing it even though it's not something you particularly enjoy, that shows a different level of love, because it's easy if both of us shared everything in common, and it would be easy to do the things that she wanted to do because we had everything in common. So to do the things that you normally wouldn't do is even more honorable in your relationship.
Yeah, and I think that there needs to be understanding with each other too. Right now, we're in very opposite seasons, because I'm home with the baby and I'm home all the time. I am always at home. And while I've calmed down a little bit, I have always been a person that likes to go and do things. I like to travel. I like to see new places. I like to try new experiences and make memories. And now I'm really just at home mostly, day in and day out. That's typically what I'm doing with the baby. He's hard to try and take places. He's a lot of work. And so, I stay home a lot. And that's the season that I'm in. But for Dwayne, he is always gone. He's always gone. He has work, and then he teaches soccer or coaches soccer. So he has Mondays and Wednesdays he is at practice. Saturdays and Sundays we have games. And for me, I'm looking at it as like, man, I'm always home. I want to get out of this house. And for him, he's like, man, I'm always gone. I just want a day to just sit and relax. So there needs to be a compromise on both parts and understanding of what the other person is experiencing. Because I could look at him and be like, man, I wanted to go out this weekend, and get all resentful because he doesn't want to go out, and vice versa. He could go out and have an attitude and be miserable and be resentful because he just wanted to stay home. But that's not serving each other. That's not loving each other. That's not submitting to each other. That's just building resentments and hurts and angers. So having this understanding of where the other person is coming from and compromising is really important. He says quality conversation. So like I said, when we have those deep conversations, that helps fill up my love tank. But I love, again, like I said earlier, I love it when I find a really good questionnaire for ask your spouse these questions, and we can get into a deep conversation and get to know each other better. Use prompts like that if you need to. I think communication is a big thing with quality time, because I think that people that want quality time typically want the conversation to go along with it. So when he talks about, or when he asks the your turn question, and again, this is for you guys, what in your marriage detracts from spending quality time? So for you, talk about that and see if you can work out a compromise to get some quality time together. Like I said, our lives are very busy right now, so quality time is hard to find, especially quality time without the baby, because we always have at least the baby with us.
It's really about the baby right now.
Yeah.
Because our boys they're teenagers now, so they're more independent and don't require the same kind of attention that the baby does.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I think that soccer does detract from it as well, but before the baby, it was a little bit easier to find time and compromise, and we weren't so exhausted, so it was easier then. But yeah, talk about what detracts from your quality time in your marriage and see if you can work some compromises out. And like Dwayne said, when you're compromising and you're thinking about it, even if it's not something that you may be interested in, you do it for the other person, because really this is about the other person. It's not about you. You're doing this for the other person. You're not doing it for yourself. So the next one he talks about is receiving gifts. And like I said earlier, gifts may not be a big thing for you. And again, people think of it as, a materialistic thing, but it's not. It's not materialistic. It's just the thought, the action of, man, you thought enough about me to just pick up some M&Ms at the gas station, or, hey, I saw this book that I know you wanted to read, so I picked it up for you and here you go. Or just simple things. It's not about the money, it's about the thoughtfulness behind it. So if your spouse's love language is receiving gifts, don't hold it against them that you're just a materialistic person, because it's not about material. It's not about the gift. It's about the heart behind it. And for the question in the your turn, he talks about reflect on ways to give gifts to one another, even if finances are tight. That's a big thing. Finances are tight, but what can you do? I think even just writing a poem or a letter to the other person, that's still a form of a gift. If money is tight, that you can't spend money, you have to get creative yourself to figure out your talent and how to give it to the other person. So just think about that, but always remember that it's not about the material thing. It's not about the item. It's about the heart behind it. The next one he talks about is acts of service, and we did that last time, so I'm not going to get too deep into that, but just know that someone whose love language is acts of service, it's about recognizing a chore that they have to do and doing it for them. Doing the dishes, cooking dinner, whole bunch of different things are acts of service. He says, you can print note cards with the following. Today I will show you my love for you by, and then complete the sentence with the following. Picking up the clutter, paying the bills, fixing something that's been broken a long time, weeding the garden. Bonus points if it's a chore that's been put off. So that's really what acts of service is. Just seeing something that needs to be done and taking action so that your partner doesn't have to do it, especially if it's a chore that they typically do. For the your turn question, he says, many acts of service will involve household chores, but not all. What are some non-chore ways of serving your mate? Think about that and apply that to your marriage. And then love language number 5 is physical touch. And I've read that men are more physical touch than women, but I don't think that's always true. I think people in general need physical touch. God designed us that way. When you have a newborn baby, one of the biggest things that they stress to you is skin-to-skin contact, holding your baby with nothing on, just your skin, so your baby feels your skin. That's a big thing, and I think that God just designed us to need physical touch. And it doesn't mean that you have to be hanging all over each other all the time, but just touching their hand, touching their arm, patting them on the back. Simple things are still physical touch that fills up their love tank. And I would also say that physical touch is not necessarily a sexual thing. Someone whose love language is physical touch is not necessarily all about sex. And recognize that it's, again, the heart behind it, the intimacy behind the touch that is what fulfills someone. For that question, well, he says over here, I would go weeks without touching him. It didn't cross my mind. So in the chapter, he's talking about, how the husband felt rejected because he wasn't getting touched by his wife. And she didn't even think about it because it wasn't her love language, but he needed that. With all of these love languages, it can make someone feel rejected if they're starving for that love language. If their love tank is empty, it can cause the person to feel rejected. For the question, he says, recall some non-sexual touching times that enhanced intimacy between the two of you. What made these times special? For me, when he's given me a good, deep hug, I always feel better, I guess. I get like a feeling of safety, I guess. I feel love. I feel all kinds of things. But when he's given me just a long, deep hug, it always feels special to me. So those are the 5 love languages. And I'm going to include the online quiz that you guys can click in the link and take the quiz and then talk about these things together. I encourage you to buy the book. I'm sure you could find a lot of the information online, but if you're like me, I like having the physical book. It's just easier for me to read and it's easier for me to just look through. But for your own marriage, for yourself, I'd say really dig into those love languages and talk to each other and learn what's best for each other and how you can help each other grow in your marriage and what the other person needs to strengthen your marriage.
So after going through all this, the point of the 5 love languages is to be intentional in whatever you're doing for the other person. And that requires thought, a lot of thought. And it just reminds me of a verse in 1 Corinthians when Paul is talking about married and unmarried people. He said something pretty interesting. But I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. There is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy, both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And I say this for your own profit, not that it may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, and that you may serve the Lord without distraction. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can go with that. But in this context, being married, if you're doing it right, then your time is going to be divided with the Lord and your wife, because you have to think about the things that build up and lift up your wife and please her, and likewise the wife to the husband. So if you're single, you have a lot more time to spend with the Lord, a lot more time to cultivate and build your relationship with God. I know when I was single, I wasn't always trying to cultivate my relationship. I was wanting to get married, and I think that took away from my time with the Lord. But if you're single, I think you should cherish it until God does bring somebody in your path to get married to. But once you're married, you are spending time thinking about the ways that you can please your wife, the ways that you can make her happy. Even though the 5 love languages are directed towards relationships with people, some of those things can be applied to your relationship with God. At the beginning, Lindsay was talking about how the spouses are trying to get to know each other. And as a Christian, remember, Christianity is not a religion. It's a relationship with God. We are the sons and daughters of the living God. We have a relationship with him, and it's not religious. So just like you try to get to know your spouse, and we talked about this a couple episodes ago, technically the children of God are the spouse of Christ. So we're married to him anyway. So we need to be building up our relationship with God all the while. Words of affirmation, in Psalms, words of affirmation is pretty much telling God about who he is. It's not for God to be puffed up, and it's not for telling God stuff he already knows. If I'm praising God for his omnipotence and his sovereignty and his reign and rule, and if I'm praising God for his providing, provision, and protection, it's not like he doesn't already know this. But at the end of the day, it builds me up when I, express these things, and it reinforces in my heart who I know he is, and it gives me comfort and strengthens my faith. When we talk about the acts of service in the 5 love languages, anything that you do in obedience to God is an act of service, and it shows who your allegiance is to. Jesus says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. So when we're obeying God, that's an act of service to God. So these things can be applied both relationally to our spouses or to other people around us, but it can also be applied to our relationship with God.
Yep, so that's all we have today. We can go ahead and pray.
Just want to thank you, Lord, for another day, another podcast. I just want to thank you that we know that you're with us, that you work in and through us, and that you never leave us nor forsake us. I just thank you for your loving kindness and your mercy over us, knowing that we don't deserve it. Help us to be thankful for all these things. I pray for the people who are listening to this, that seed is being planted on good ground so that you can add the increase to it, so that it's thrown onto good soil, and that you would just bless these people to grow in their own relationships, whether they're single or married, and just help them to be motivated to want to love people in a deeper way, to make them more intentional in the things that they do and say to others, but with you in mind for your honor and your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, thanks for listening. And again, I will include a link for you guys to go to the online website and take the love languages quiz. And I encourage you to do that with your spouse and talk about all the things we talked about. Put these love languages into action for each other. And share this with people that you think need to hear this. And if you have any feedback, definitely let us know. We appreciate you listening. Have a good day.